So good to see all of your smiling faces this morning. We will go ahead and jump in and get started. You are in the Equity Continuum breakout, and we are really excited to talk with you today about the Equity Continuum that we have worked with GIA to develop. We want to start today's session with a moment of gratitude. So give yourselves, a moment in time to pause in your morning and identify someone who you are incredibly grateful for today. And you can hold that person to yourself, or you can jot their name in the chat, either one, but just like hold on to that moment of gratitude, that person that you are incredibly grateful for this morning. We're starting with this moment of gratitude because we know that gratitude is a beautiful practice and something that we really hold near and dear to our heart. And we would be remiss if we didn't talk about all the people that we are grateful for that helped us in this process, that helped us in this journey to create this equity continuum. We're so grateful for GIA. We are so grateful for the funders that made all of this work possible, the Equity Ant, and all the partners that came together to really create this living document that we are excited to be able to talk to you about today. So thank you for all of your gratitude flowing into the chat. It's lovely to see so much bright and early this morning. We'll go ahead and start with some introductions. Ida, can I turn it to you to kick us off?
Of course. Good morning. So excited to be in this space with all of you today. My name is Ida Hermosillo, Director of Network Engagement for Growing Inland Achievement. Do you want me to introduce the rest of you? Or
No, I couldn't find the mute button fast enough. Thanks, Ida. My name is Emily Appel. I'm the COO and co-founder of Made by Change. Dave?
Good to see you all. Happy Friday. My name is Dave Hardy. I'm the CEO of Made by Change. Mark?
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thanks for having us. I'm Mark Commanducci. I'm the founder and CEO of the 305 Education Group.
Thanks, everyone. And I think we have at least one co-chair of the Equity Ant with us this morning. Dr. Sullivan, will you quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Dr. Talisa Sullivan from Riverside County Office of Education, and I work with the GIA as a co-chair for the Equity ANT, and so I'm so grateful to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the meat of our session, and we're excited to get started. So we're going to spend our time today talking about the journey to create the equity continuum, and we'll move through by talking about sort of the why, the how, and the what. We sort of worked together over the past few months to create this equity continuum with GIA's Equity Ant. And I actually want to have Ida get us started with the why, talk about why GIA wanted to embark on this journey, why this felt like a needed tool.
Thank you, Emily. Some of you hopefully were able to join us yesterday and learned a little bit about the Equity ANT, but and there we shared that, as we started the work during COVID, what we thought would be post-COVID, but really just from the beginning, we knew that equity was important to our region. GIA and all our partners really put that in the forefront of their work. And a lot of the engagement we had with their partners really revolved around, like, how do we really do this? Nobody wanted a checklist. Nobody wanted a tool that would end up in a shelf, right? We really wanted to be live content. As one of our partners from Making Hope Happen said, what do we want this to be? A cathedral? Do we want it to be a farmer's market feel? And I just love that because it really created a lot of organic momentum in the way this was built. What we did let Made by Change know is that we wanted it to be unique to the region. We wanted it to incorporate the voices, the vision, the hopes that our region wanted for our communities and our students and educators. And so we knew that a checklist was not going to be good enough. We bounced around words like tools, rubrics, and then we had this whole session, like they talked about yesterday in the meeting, just to brainstorm out what does equity really mean in this work? What do we want to define it as? And more importantly, what is this tool really going to be called? How do we make sure that the vibe, from the beginning, the experience is movement and not stagnant. And so we came up with the word continuum. And so we decided that we wanted to be a live content. We wanted to be evolving. We didn't want it to be stale. And so that's really kind of like the history and the story behind how this work started. And so, really the voices and partnerships of all our region, K through 20 spaces, community members, students took place. And so really we just designed what we wanted to say was phases or dimensions of how this would look. And you'll learn a little bit more about that as we move through this session. So Talisa, anything you'd like to add to that?
Hi, yeah, so just, Ida really summed it all up, and I just kind of wanted to continue into, just not having Ida mentioned not having a stale, something that was just kind of sitting and stagnant. And so the continuum versus like having something that is deficit based, it's really going to be more of a open growth mindset based continuum, so that people can see where they are on the continuum and see how they can best serve their community, their students, their staff, their population. And so it's really a continuum for the entire Inland Empire and not just for one or the other institution. So we were thinking that we wouldn't create something that would just be for this, this institution or that institution, but something that people can look at and say, this is where I am on an equity continuum.
Thank you both so much for talking about the why. Knowing why you're creating something is so incredibly important. It really helps drive the path for what you're creating. And the next thing that we feel like before we sort of unveil parts of this tool to you all, this continuum to you all, we think it's important to talk about is like the process that we took to get here. So Made by Change and the 305 Education Group feel really deeply that it is important to design with organizations, not for them. So we certainly could be off in a vacuum or in a room somewhere by ourselves creating something, but that wouldn't actually be true to your organizations, true to your region, true to who you all are. And so our process was really intentional in creating lots of opportunities to work with the members of the team. Dr. Sullivan, I'm wondering if you can highlight just a couple of key points about that experience or sort of how the process went as we were creating this continuum.
Yes, definitely love the process. It definitely was very collaborative. And one of the things that we thought that we wanted was some individuals to come in that kind of were a part of our group. And this, Made by Change and 305, I think it is, came in and was really a part of the group and asked the right questions, helped to develop the continuum without, bias or judgment or anything, but just kind of facilitating the conversation, ensuring that the voices were heard. And I thought it was very, very strategic how they made sure that voices were heard. And it was like, as an equity person, we always want to make sure that we hear everybody. And so they had specific and strategic ways of ensuring that they captured the thought process. And it's evident in the continuum. It's definitely evident in the continuum that it wasn't just one group, this group. They made a huge effort to ensure that they had multiple meeting times so that if you couldn't make this meeting, you were able to go to this meeting so that they can capture those voices. And I just thought that the process was just very seamless. And I feel like as a result, I mean, I don't think they live in the Inland Empire, but it feels like they do. It feels like they were invested in the process to the extent of really being a part of the community. So I can't say enough about the process. It was really a great process.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sullivan. And it looks like maybe we have one or two other members of the Equity Ant on the call. Does anyone else want to come off mute and share just a little bit about their perspective on the experience or how those conversations went?
I'm not a part of the Equity Ant, but I would say, Emily, if you could just maybe go to the next slide, I think building upon what Dr. Sullivan shared. This kind of outlines the actual meeting cadence that we were able to engage with the Equity Ant and its members over the last couple of months. So just to give a little more background, for those of you that were a part of the opening session yesterday, Leona from Catalyst Ed spoke and that's how this project sort of came together. So we were partnered with GIA through a Catalyst Ed. We were lucky enough to bring in Made by Change and Dave and Emily, where, we're all just working kind of seamlessly on this. But I think when we think about, designing with and not for, this is sort of from a tactical perspective, how we approach that, where we wanted to come in and really learn and listen first. So you'll see there were like 5 different sessions where we we're kind of just flies on the walls, kind of seeing where the process was when we were lucky enough to join, to kind of learn a bit about not only the individuals, but the different lenses and perspective that those individuals were bringing. And then we went through a pretty robust, over the span of 3 months, and you can see from June to August, of what we call the co-designing. And I think Emily and Dave will definitely chime in, but we use that term intentionally, co-designing, and I think we were more of the note catchers and gatherers than creating anything new or unique. And I think that's really guided this process. We wanted to ask some important questions. I think we wanted to, while also learn, potentially challenge some assumptions. But throughout that co-design, we were working with members of the Equity Ant, some every session, some joining for 1 or 2, and really trying to figure out not only how the continuum would look and feel, but obviously also the content and how it could become this living document that doesn't, using Ida's term, just sit on the shelf. And I think, as you'll see, we put more emphasis, time, and effort in those sessions because that's where the continuum came to life. And if you were to go back and look at any of those recordings, I think you'll see we are usually not the ones talking. So this session is a little bit, I think, uncomfortable for us and how we've engaged with you all, because we really weren't here to, like many strategic planning processes, to like learn a little bit and then go off on our own and create something that then becomes either what it is or gets put on a shelf. And I think the intentionality of that co-design phase or that process, I think created a really organic product. I think the continuum where it stands now is great. But I think, reiterating what others have said, like where it is now, and you'll see some parts of it in a little bit, isn't where it's going to be in a couple of months. And how it's used is going to change. And I think we heard that loud and clear in these co-designing sessions. And we tried to make the continuum as responsive to the needs of individual stakeholders. But I'll say, like, the group is really diverse. And it presented a really interesting, unique challenge for us, but I think the end result was really great. And building upon what Emily said, like there's a bunch of folks that were in a lot of those sessions on the call right now. And again, would love to open it up to anyone, members of the Equity Ant, that would love to share sort of their thoughts, their experience of being a part of this process with the larger group would be great.
I one of the things I could add, and I have to shout out to 305 and making a change happen, because it was a big ask. We said, we need help with this, but it needs to be the voice of the region. And, they did such a great job. And it's such a unique space because, like we said, it was K through 20, right? So it's like, how do you design something that could be ever evolving and yet so to create the availability of customization and at the same time be general. And so even like, as you guys will see, like dimensions that were built and stuff like that, we talked about everything from like what a student might feel walking a campus to how funds work to how, and it was just interesting because it was such a diverse group, not only, and at a deep level, but also like where their work is, like where their passion sit, like their struggles at campus or in their institutions or organizations. And this was all during summer. And so, I mean, it's just such an honor, that, these individuals, some of you that are here today, put in that extra effort and time where you could be, somewhere else to really, really says a lot about the commitment to the region and equity in the forefront of the work we do every single day. So just want to add that. I know we have Kim, my partner in crime, that was part of this. We have Leslie from GP, lead on Mars. joined us during summer. So don't be shy. Feel free to add any content, what you felt, what did it feel like to be part of these sessions? Those things are so valuable.
Well, I'll chime in. Kim McNulty, One Future. I'm excited to see what it looks like because I think we allowed it to be messy at the beginning, to have just open conversation and sort of feel where things fit. And Talisa led us through it. I think we started doing it with kind of a sticky wall where people could throw up ideas, and there was conversation about what the shape it should take, and should it be a line, should it be a circle. So I'm excited to see where it landed, and I echo Ida's comments that I think it was really candid conversation and great thoughtful comments made throughout the process. So I'm excited to see how it landed, and I appreciate everyone for being a part of the conversation because it's going to impact work across the Inland Empire. We're doing a lot of this also out in the Coachella Valley and the far east end. So really, really appreciate it. Excited to see how it's taking shape.
And I'll add a little bit also, definitely K-20, but we had nonprofits as far as, being a part of the facilitation, because we wanted to make sure that there are some institutions that may not be specifically working with students or with educators, but that are still a part of the Inland Empire, so that they can also look at the continuum too and see how their role in the education, in the educational process is providing equitable opportunities and access for the population of individuals that they serve. So just wanted to throw that out there as well.
Any final thoughts before we move forward? Mark, did you have anything to add?
No, I think that wraps it up.
Right. All right. So thank you all for those words, because it speaks a lot to this next slide. When we really look to capture the what, right? And this equity continuum does just that. It outlines how members within your community, within the greater Inland Empire, are able to engage in identifying high quality impact strategies and practices that could activate you as a region to ensure that there is an equitable approach towards the outcomes for the young people in your region, whether or not they're in a formal educational institution or, like Dr. Sullivan just spoke to, outside of that container, but in the atmosphere of supporting it and helping young people thrive. And so the equity continuum does just that. So we're going to share a couple things with you. And Kim, thank you for teeing us up with the excitement to seeing what is here. So I feel like this is a grand opening. It's a Friday. It's a movie premiere. Let's actually premiere the equity continuum today. So there's some key components to the continuum that have been outlined throughout the process. And there's a reason why we intentionally spent a lot of time, to Mark's point, listening deeply, because we realized a few things that came out in developing this continuum. One of which, we wanted to ensure that we were helping build something that helps identify the obstacles that were going to get in the way or currently getting in the way of creating equitable outcomes for people that are coming at this work from many different lenses. We also heard loud and clear from folks that they needed to know what to do next, right? We've sat in and been a part of probably plenty of DEI trainings or had conversations around equity. We even, to the point earlier discussed, tried to define it and spent time defining equity. However, a lot of times organizations across this country stop there. And what's so wonderful about GIA and its partners is realize like it's not enough to stop there with conversation. We have to figure out what we need to do and move to action. And that became very clear that we needed to support the efforts to crystallize those things that we're already living and thinking in the thinking of the wonderful folks at GIA. So in this continuum, there are components that help figure out that how. And so one of the key parts of creating this is identifying steps that folks can take and utilize as they're going into this work. So you're going in with a little bit of a playbook, a little bit of a direction, so you're not going into it blind and unsure of how to begin the process, which is often the hardest part when going into equity work. How do I start? So the continuum has an how-to section included. One more click there. And for each of the dimensions, and there are 6 total dimensions, I'll mention them in a second, we wanted to ensure that there was a space for data. This came loud and clear from the ANT and from a lot of the conversations around where do we know the inequities exist? How do we know they exist? What are the numbers behind this? So that could be an impetus to create change if we understand the depth and breadth of the problem. So intentionally for each of the dimensions, there's a section that helps folks orient themselves around the data points they can look at in approaching the inequities they may see for that dimension. Then there are the actual dimensions. For this continuum at this state, and again, I say at this state because I think over time this will continue to grow and shift and really be responsive to your community. There are 6 dimensions, one of which is allocation of resources, communication, policy, culture, physical space, and data. Now, again, those were the 6 that kind of rose to the top right now, understanding there's some components that will probably be added on later on, but felt that these cornerstones will help get folks started and focus on the things that will start to create impact and immediate change for you and your folks in your locale. So 6 dimensions, all of which will look like this, and we'll dive a little bit deeper on what those components are in the dimensions in a second. In curating dimensions, we also realized, and I want to say that Carlos mentioned this yesterday during the equity session, it was important that we helped folks create space to figure out how to use this within their region, within their community, but not limit them to the 6 that have been created so far, but give them the tools to ensure that they can create additional dimensions so you can support the equity needs within your region. So for example, if those 6 are not the biggest priority for you and your organization, we've built in elements and guides to give you pathlights to creating an additional dimension or 2 within your region that's aligned to how you can approach and think about creating equity for you. And so that was an important piece and an addition in this equity continuum. And then last but not least, one of the most important and critical pieces is ensure there's a set of common language and understandings embedded into the tool, because sometimes the work is hard enough. Getting tripped up on some of the language that's attached to it makes it even harder to make sure that equity happens. So there's a space for additional definitions as well. When you take those components, you start to look at the dimensions itself. So again, I mentioned there are 6 dimensions, and there's some intentionality around how each dimension was kind of organized. One of which, as at the top, you'll always see the dimension, and I give you a definition on the page. Just above this, there's a definition of the actual dimension, so you can see what it's relating to, gives you a little bit of context on how to approach creating equity within this dimension within your ecosystem. The second piece are the phases. And we spoke a little bit earlier today. You heard folks speak to like, how do we want to frame this? And we landed on continuum from the voices of the ANT, realizing that this is a journey. This is not a sprint. There is no final destination. But we want to recognize folks are entering into these conversations at different points of that journey. And by doing so, you want to be careful around how you language those phases so that folks realize it's not a judgment, it's just a state of being. And so phases were intentionally identified, as you see there, as an equitable, equity focused, equity affirming, and then sustained equity as you move from left to right. And from the stakeholder standpoint, this was a wonderful conversation. I think it was a series of conversations within the group of figuring out how do we create equity within an equity continuum. And one of those important ways is ensuring that voices are highlighted and are emphasized within the tool so people can see where they are individually within the larger ecosystem. So this is a snapshot. This is actually a 2-page dimension where you will see the student voices has also a continuum row. You will also see staff. You'll see the same as you can see here for administration and organization, and for the family experience as well. So the stakeholders and having them identified was important for us so that we are ensuring that there is a voice for all of those that are in your community. And working with you, you identified those as the stakeholders that were most important. And again, this could evolve over time, but felt good hearing from the group saying, you know what, we want to make sure we're identifying our individual stakeholders, and you'll see that built throughout. And then the bottom here is the progress of the actual continuum for those individual stakeholder groups. And this became important from conversations with the ANT, realizing that sometimes in equity work, folks then start equity work, but don't have anything that keeps them going. And what progress is allowing them to do is it allows you to see what is working and allows you to see if you're making progress, and gives you a sense of quick wins in the sense of, am I moving in the right direction? Not necessarily moving right, but moving in the right direction, so that you can figure out, is this working and how should it be working for us as we move from left to right? So this indicators of movement became key from the conversations, because a lot of times there isn't a place to show and identify progress, and this tool is intentionally built to help highlight some of those things. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention one other thing before we go to the next slide. The intent behind a lot of this is also to realize that within your region, there's going to be a lot of nuance in how this tool is used. One of the additional uses of a tool like this is to support and align to some of the other systems you already have in place. And if I'm not mistaken, on the community college level, there is a state requirement in which you have an equity plan in which you're developing this. And we're hoping this tool could be a supplement or a support to creating those plans and supporting and aligning to the work that's already done. And that's the same for all organizations. How can you see this tool in supplementing some of the work that you're already doing? And we feel that the A&T did a tremendous job just raising these points. And hopefully we were able to curate the vision that they had in a way that allows regions to use and supplement some of the work they're already doing, or give you a place to start and build from. Emily, I'll turn it over to you.
So we'd love to, for a few minutes before we move to sort of next steps, what comes next with this continuum, and answering any questions, is would love to just hear some reactions. Like, how could you envision using a tool like this within your organization? Feel free to come off mute or drop your reflections in the chat, but would love to hear sort of what you're feeling, what you're thinking about now that you've had a preview of this continuum. Or for members of the Equity A&T, how are you thinking about taking this back? Those of you that are intimately familiar, how are you going to take it back and use it with your organizations?
Well, I'll share that in Coachella Valley, we facilitate a number of alignment teams, which are similar to the ANTs through GIA. And I think this will be we could introduce this through the different teams and just get feedback about how it relates and how they could see it impacting or influencing the work of the team. And then I think from there, it's a resource tool for all the partners that we connect and convene in the desert. So it'll be good to, I'm excited to take a look at it, and then we can brainstorm with our One Future team about what we might do with it and how we might introduce it and infuse it. But
thanks, Kim. Would love to hear from one other person.
Also, too, if we have any community college partners on, I'd love to hear. I know we heard yesterday from Dr. Latanya Parker a little bit about the equity plans being implemented and built at the community colleges and the impact this type of work could have. So if we have any community college partners, we'd love to hear a little bit about that too.
I'll go. This is Leslie Belmonte, Guided Pathways Regional Coordinator for the Inland Empire Desert. And, I think right now, everyone's continuing to struggle with having the conversations about equity, and then also feeling like they're alone in this work. So I feel like having this tool, it helps them give that reason of hey, let's sit down, let's have a conversation about this. Let's fill this out together and then, see where it goes. I mean, hopefully they can identify, areas that they can improve on, areas that they're even strong on now, to celebrate, especially because just being able to look at some of the accomplishments is what helps us keep moving forward in social justice work. So I think it's a really valuable tool.
Thanks, Leslie. So I know I want to make sure that we leave time for questions. So we have a small ask of you all. Want to just name that, this tool is incredibly important. And as we were moving through this process, we had a couple of key takeaways that we wanted to share and make sure that we lift it up. We know that this is just one piece of the puzzle, one step in an equity journey. And so I wanted to name a couple of these things. First is that this is a resource It's a tool, it is a rubric, it can be used in conjunction with other efforts, but it's not a carrot or a stick, and it's not going to work in isolation. The second is that there's got to be more dimensions. Dave spoke to this well, so we are going to be looking for feedback. We'll talk about that in just a second. And this is not meant to be a checklist. It's not meant for you to sort of go through, highlight where your organization is, and then put it back on the shelf. It is going to be something that will hopefully spur conversation, spur action, maybe create teams, maybe even create guidance for how you're sort of thinking and working and operating as an organization. And then last is that this is a living document, even though that it is in like sort of PDF form, so we can hand it to you and you can look at it. It will not stay sort of in this version 1.0. It will probably have version 2.0, version 3.0. The goal of a document like this is that it is growing and evolving, and that the region is able to use it together as a tool. So my small ask for you that I previewed is that there's going to be a pilot to use the tool or the rubric as it is in its current form with some organizations. We need to, over the next few months, have organizations like test out using the tool as it is. We want to sort of experience that alongside you. And in order to do that, we need some volunteers. So just to give you a heads up of sort of where we're headed over the next few months. So we are in that September convening time. We've shared version 1 with you, or version 1 will be coming out very shortly. And then we're going to do an equity continuum pilot. We'll do some refinement, really look at like what parts of the tool are working and not, what parts make a ton of sense, or what parts are actually kind of hard to use, and how might we revise it. Maybe there are additional dimensions that rise to the surface as it is used. So we're hoping that organizations, some brave organizations out there, might be interested in volunteering or signing up for this pilot. My partner is going to drop a link in the chat. You can also scan this with your phone, and it's just an interest form. So if you think your organization might be interested in partnering or being part of this pilot, you can scan this and give us your name and email address, and we will be in touch as we start to form and bring together folks for this pilot. With that said, I will actually stop sharing my screen for questions and answers, because you don't need to see the blue screen. You need to see all of our faces. So would love to take our last 5 minutes or so and answer any questions that you all might have about the process, about why, about the rubric itself, the members of the Equity A&T, and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Could you put a link to the draft of it in the chat, just so I could take a further look at it? My screen, I have to confess, I work on a little 11-inch screen, so sometimes I can't get it very big, but I think we might be interested in piloting it. I can follow up with Ida, talk with our team. Several of us are on this meeting, so we can explore it.
Yeah, and we'll be able to share the link also for interests to become part of the early adoption process with the bigger group that, we know some educators are in the classrooms. We know a lot of our partners weren't able to make it today. And we're sensitive to that. I wish we could do these conferences Saturday or Sunday, but who wants to do that? So we will definitely send that out in a bigger scale for the early adoption process, because what we do know is we're going to need to capture like those details, maybe even those stories behind the scenes as they're trying to implement certain phases, maybe some type of conversations that take place that are critical to additional details that might want to be captured. So it's so important. And not only is the early adoption critical, but the goal for GIA is to provide professional development around that early adoption process. So we know that this is a big ask. We know that all our partners have a lot already on the table. They have multiple initiatives, requests, needs, and goals that they need to attain to. But because of that, we know that this work is so important in all your spaces. And we want to be able to not only provide this tool, but build resources around it for it to be effective and and really enrich the work you do every day. Because like someone said it earlier, it's, even those conversations, we heard things like, how do I even talk about equity? What words do I use? Like, what are people responding to? What are they maybe sensitive or not to? It sounds so simple, but those are the kind of conversations we've heard. Even words like, do I say Black or do I say African American? And what's amazing about this team and really all our partners, it's like they're transparent. They're not apologetic. Like they can ask those questions and feel in a safe space to get a good answer, a general voices of the team. And so you'd be surprised how much of that we heard throughout this process. And so no one's an expert in this work, but together, not only will we do it better, we'll be stronger in it. And so we will share the link if you guys feel that your team, your organization, department, right? So we understand, for example, like Cal State or UCR may have a department that's interested in this early adoption phase before they roll out to the whole institution or embed. So just some ideas of how we hope that this happens in the early adoption phase. And we need diversity in early adoption. We want to see community members, we want to see institutions, organizations, faculty, administration. It takes all of us, not just the equity team at an institution or the D&I team at an organization. It takes all of us putting equity in the forefront of our work every day. So we will share that out to the entire attendee list, specifically those that attended the equity sessions. And obviously through the equity ants, if you already participate, all our teams will receive the invitation for early adoption as well. And I'll add my email here in case you guys want to send it to me too.
So we might have time for one more question. Also, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We can take them back and share out answers later. We are incredibly grateful for all of you this morning and choosing to come to this session and learning about the continuum.